Hello,
Hello, how are you doing?
I am good. How are you?
Yeah, fine, fine. Just another week.
Day, another painting.
Exactly. So today I have chosen to look at a painting by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, um, called Young Girl Reading. It was painted around 1769 and it's currently in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And I wondered if you would like to describe it.
I would love to describe it. You said National Gallery, and I was like, wait, what? I haven't seen this. And then you said of art, and I was like, Washington.
Yeah.
Okay, so whether or not this painting is big or small, I don't know, but it's giving the impression of a small painting just because of its the scale of the brush marks when you look at it. But it could just be a very gestural large painting, who knows? It's a girl sitting on a chair that you can only really see the arm of it because she's kind of in sort of a seated three-quarter length
Mhm.
um, on this massive like fat cushion, which looks really comfortable, and like a kind of brown and sort of grayish green background. And all the colors kind of contrast with each other. Like she's got this bright yellow dress with the pinks in the cushion and this grey green background
Mm.
that all kind of like slam up against each other in this kind of like heightened color where it sort of feels like you've taken a photo into edit mode and like
Mhm.
pulled some levers and made some contrasts a bit more high intensity. Like the shadow on the book that she's reading in with one hand is like bright red,
Yeah.
and her hands are like sort of almost like Disney pink, like a
Mhm.
Disney princess.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Quite yeah, the colors just feel quite surreal, and like the red on her cheeks is like actually red, not pink. It's red.
Mhm.
The whole thing feels quite amped up and a little over the top. That maybe like I don't want to say flouncy just based on her clothes, but it's something about the color as well because the clothes are just like I'm guessing of their time, but the color matched with the clothes, like the pinks and the yellows and the green. It's all quite. It feels quite frivolous and flouncy and
Yeah.
pretty. And that's not just because she's got a bow in her hair and a bow's on her chest and a ruff. It's something about it that says, "Ooh, pretty."
Flouncy. Yeah. I
And
like
that's
it.
my very very academic description.
Yeah, I love it. I think giving a description of a painting of also how it makes you feel or just the first impressions is actually so nice to record as well.
Mm,
Because often once you get more into it and you learn more information, you kind of forget what that first impression was.
definitely.
So I think flouncy and frivolous and look at me. Look at me, kind of. I like Disney pink as well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Cinderella and like they have that like flat
Mm.
pink color to them. Well, the white
Yeah,
princesses, I guess.
yeah,
Um, yeah, in the early Disney, that's what it's giving to me.
definitely. So this is, as I say, it's called Young Girl Reading, and it is 81 by 64 centimeters. So it's kind of middling. It's not a huge painting. Um, it's if you think of a ruler as 30 centimeters, and then you double that, that's kind of the bottom, like the horizontal.
That's bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and up also up close, like you say, the brush marks are very loose. So at that size as well, it does both. You can see the brush marks and also obviously the figure is pronounced and we'll talk more about the style of the actual painting as well because that's a key part of this. But I wanted to just start, I guess, with something that I thought was an interesting point of entry to this painting, which is thinking about that this is a picture of a woman reading and there was an article recently published by a journalist called James Marriott about the reading revolution that was happening around this time. in 1700s Europe, and how he kind of is arguing about this counter-revolution that's happening now where literacy rates are falling. And apparently there's some good stats where it says, the historian Simon Sharma has said that literacy rates in 18th century France were much higher than in the late 20th century United States, which I think is quite an interesting thing if we think about this painting in that context as well. Just that this was the time where like ordinary people were starting to read books and pamphlets, and literacy was really on the up over this century. And thinking just about, like, it was this week that I read that article and was thinking, oh, it's kind of timely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, to go into Fragonard, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this is because I just really love Fragonard, and I think he's one of these painters who, when you look at him, can appear, as you say, quite frivolous, quite twee, almost. That would be the word I would describe. Quite Disney princess.
Yeah.
But I think as a painter, he's a lot more intricate than that, and there has a lot more depth to it. So hopefully, like, if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, this is such a twee painting, stick with it and see if you like him more by the end.
I'm definitely sticking with it. There's quite a few.
I'm glad you are.
I'm here to try and like Fragonard.
Okay, yes, thank you. So just quickly, the sources for today are obviously the National Gallery of Art website entry for this, but also for the painting, but also they had an exhibition in 2017 called Fragonard, the Fantasy Figures, of which this painting is part of. And then to do with this portrait in particular, there's also a lecture from 2017, also to do with the exhibition, called Fragonard's Young Girl Reading, New Perspectives, which has 3 different speakers, Cassandra Albinson, Yuriko Jakal, and Marika Knowles. And if you do really like this episode and you desperately want to know more about Fragonard, I would say this is a good starting point, because it's an academic lecture, but it's really interesting and lots of cool ideas and points. So I mainly used that, to be honest, and then also an article on the Art Forum website about the series that this painting belongs to. Would you like me to start with the biography of Fragonard or the painting itself?
Let's go biography.
Let's go biography. Let's go into Jean-Honoré. I just call him Fragonard all the time. So
yeah.
So Fragonard is considered one of the most important French painters of his era. He was born in 1732 in Grasse in southeast France, which is on the French Riviera, but his family relocated to Paris a few years later in 1738. As a young boy, he enrolled as an apprentice of Chardin, who they have some of his stuff in the National Gallery in London. I know Lucien Freud really liked Chardin. That's why.
Chardin still lives, sort of known for still life.
Yes, and in the National Gallery, there's one of a French tutor, woman tutoring a young child. I think there's also one. But the hand in that looks quite similar to the hand in this painting, actually. I just realised, like, it's quite an economy of line, like very fast painting.
I'm with you now. I'm caught up.
And then, so that was as a young boy with Chardin. And then around 1749, he entered the studio of Francois Boucher. And he followed Boucher's Rococo style very closely. And we'll get onto Rococo because that's like a key part of understanding this painting and Fragonard. And I think Fragonard's a really good entry point into that style. But some other influences for Fragonard are during the time he spent traveling in Italy in the 1750s. So he was influenced by the works of Venetian painter Giovanni Battista Tiepolo, who makes very sumptuous flowery paintings. Again, National Gallery in London has a lot.
It has those ones that are, I think it's Tiepolo's, they were supposed to be on a ceiling, so they're hung at like a funny angle.
Yes, and think of, if you haven't seen them, it's really like the top of a church, flowery, what fluffy almost, paintings of clouds and cherubs and roses and things like that. Um, but then he was also influenced by the loose brush strokes of painters from the Dutch and Flemish schools. So that's like Frans Hals and Rubens
Mm.
as well. Um, and Fragonard, while he was in Italy, he also explored the romantic gardens of Italy. So that is important, even though it sounds kind of funny just to think, oh, he was walking around gardens, and that's nice. But he was influenced by things like the fountains, the grottos, the terraces in Italy at that time. So interesting to think about how garden design was kind of part of that aesthetic, I guess,
Yeah.
of over the topness. In 1761, Fragonard returned to Paris, where he had lots of commissions from collectors, art dealers, and aristocrats, including easel paintings and also decorative schemes for private palaces. Lots of his works were scenes of galanterie, courtliness or chivalry, which were popular with the wealthy patrons of King Louis XV's court. And my knowledge of French history is pretty cloudy, but apparently King Louis XV was known, and his court was known for being notoriously extravagant and into their pleasures in various forms. So in this is where we kind of get into the Rococo style. So it's the voluptuousness of Fragonard's paintings really appealed to the court. And one of his most famous paintings is The Swing, which is in the Wallace collection in London. And you really get a sense of that scene of love and courtship, but with these, I suppose, erotic undertones and very frivolous scenes.
Yeah, the swing seems like a far more sort of tight painting, like in its
Yeah,
brushwork than this.
it is for sure. And I think The Swing was more, it seems to be much more attached to the Rococo style.
Right.
Whereas, as we'll see, like Young Girl Reading and the series of paintings which it was based in is a lot looser. And yeah, so just to kind of finish with Fragonard's quick biography and life, he apparently rarely exhibited at the Salon, and so he was set apart from the Academy during this time because he wasn't as interested in the historical, religious, or mythological scenes that were generally accepted in the more formal Academy at the time. And the French Revolution broke out in 1789, and so Fragonard, being quite beloved by the king's court, thought it was probably a good idea to leave, which is fairly sensible, I would say. He went.
We had BJ Lebrun as well. She had to leave.
Yeah. So everybody's scarpering. So he left Paris and he went to Grasse, where he was born. He returned a few years later in 1792, where he found that his clients and patrons had been either guillotined or exiled. So not great, Fragonard. He died in Paris in 1806. I think fairly poor, but I can't remember exactly the state he was in when he died.
That was interesting because when we did an episode on Vija Lebrun, she went off traveling Europe and painting for European aristocrats and like did that instead.
Well, that sounds more
more sort of sensible way to deal with the problem.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe she was more in the academy as well. Like, oh, I'm not sure. No, maybe not.
I think to some degree, but maybe not because she was a woman. So.
Yeah. No, I was going to say. Anyway, just to think a bit more about Rococo style. This is where Fragonard was such a shift for me. I went through a phase of him a couple of years ago when I went to the Louvre, and loads of so I keep saying fantasy figures. Basically, this was part of a series. This painting is part of a series of, I think, 14 surviving paintings, but originally 18, um,
Right.
all of individual figures in different leisure activities. I'll explain more about that later, but just about Rococo, yeah, I basically like the Fragonard was my way of understanding what this period was. And I suppose the best way I could describe it would be as being like an even more frilly and flowery Baroque. So you have Baroque in, I guess it comes about like late 16th century. And we're talking about Rococo style as emerging in France in the late 1730s and then soon spreading to other parts of Europe. So sometimes it's actually called late Baroque. It dates until roughly around the 1760s, but obviously these kind of chronologies are never that neat.
Late Baroque just sounds like people who want to deny the existence of Rococo.
Yeah, it's true.
It's like my friend was talking about some author, she's Welsh, and she was talking about a map of Britain and talking about West Britain was on this map.
Great.
That's what late Baroque sounds like.
Late Baroque is like, I don't want to engage in this.
Yeah, we're in denial.
Yeah. And there was, I think that the point about Rococo as well was that that the fact that it started in France. So the connection it had, as I said, to the court at the time, and the word Rococo comes from roquet, which is a kind of garden decoration using seashells, which was first used in France and Italy. So again, the garden design aspect comes into it.
Right.
And I think that's also an interesting point about Rococo because it has that real sensuousness to it, and it seems very sensory. So is Baroque for sure. I think about Baroque as when you walk into a church in Spain or Italy, or Bavaria. My friend's looking at Bavarian monasteries, and he says if you want Baroque, go to some Bavarian monasteries because it's like an explosion of ornate decoration and paintings and everything. Very, very different to churches in the UK.
Yeah.
So Rococo is, seen as the transition period, really, between Baroque and Neoclassicism. Rococo, more than the floweriness of Baroque, it's more characterized by fun, pleasure, eroticism, and humor. So in many ways, being frivolous is kind of the point of it. And like most art movements, it was a reaction against a kind of opposite style. So it came out of the more formal geometric style associated with King Louis XIV. And then Rococo emerged, I guess, as a reaction to that. So with the French classicism style, that's painters like Georges de la Tour and Rigaud. So that's more characterized by like harmony and regularity and symmetry and composition, whereas Rococo is like it's just everywhere and it's a bit bonkers.
All at once.
Yes. And I think definitely it can look quite twee. So it has voluptuous brushstrokes, often pastel colors. It's that very pink-cheeked and white-skinned ladies, little cherubs, sumptuous fabrics, a lot of motion and drama. But there's also often allegorical scenes, pastoral scenes, that kind of thing. So it's a bit of a bonkers style. And this painting, some say, so in the lecture that I mentioned, they talk about how this painting, in it, Fragonard is maybe starting to bridge from Rococo to Neoclassicism, which comes later, because it definitely has some of those descriptors that we've talked about, like those pink cheeks and the frivolity of the brushwork and the colours, but also the Neoclassicism the neoclassical style starts to be more about, like, one part of it at least would be like more inward looking and more restraint. And she definitely is a figure that is engaged in reading. She's not looking at the viewer. She's very serene and focused. So it's certainly different to the swing, say,
Yeah.
in that sense.
Yeah, I wouldn't put the two as by the same artist.
Yeah, it's true. And I think part of the reason why I was able to get beyond just the Rococo frivolity was the brushwork
Mm.
that Fragonard displays. And actually, like, his teacher, Francois Boucher, if you can get beyond some of the, like, the subject matter, which can look very twee, almost as like figurines or something that you find like on your nan's shelf or something like that, that kind of thing. If you get beyond that, like just looking technically at the paintwork and the oil paint, it's amazing. So in this painting, like he has such freedom with his mark making, with the brushwork. And you can see in certain parts as well, he has done this technique called alla prima painting, which is where it's wet on wet.
Yeah.
So I don't know, did you know about this? I only learnt about this technique, but
I
maybe you
know
could shed
about
some light on it.
painting, but only from studying painting.
Okay.
But I studied painting as a sort of bystander who didn't paint, but that was that.
Nice. It's it definitely creates this it allows him to create a lot of texture with the paint, but also he's scratched into the surface with the other end of his paintbrush in certain parts. So you see that it creates this line, very loose line in her ruff, and then the lace around her collar, and then also in she has her left arm rested on a chair sill, or almost like a windowsill, kind of. And that line has been really emphasized through a scratch as well. And that's not something that I associate as much with Rococo in a way.
No, that's not a very sort of pretty finicky way of painting, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So more about this painting in particular. As I say, it's part of this series called the Fantasy Figures. They were all made around 1769. So Fragonard was in his late 30s. I always find it useful to know how old they were.
Yeah, I quite like that.
And then also freak out when they're like 16. I'm like, oh my God.
Don't like that so much.
You're so good. So yeah, this was a series of 18 rapidly made, brightly coloured paintings of individuals doing various leisure activities. So one might be acting, although I don't really know how you show acting, but they're kind of in quite a dramatic pose. Or another one writing or singing or playing an instrument, or like here, reading. On the Art Forum website's article that I mentioned, this series is described as neither conventional likenesses nor pure fantasies, but rather portraits of portraits. So there's a lot of debate around, are these individuals, were these commissioned? They generally are said to probably have been for Fragonard's patrons and friends and maybe other artists, but many were sold soon after they were produced. So it seems to be, from what I've read, that they're really about exploring the boundaries of portrait painting. Some of them might have been real people, but they're not necessarily, like in this painting, you'd expect a portrait to be looking more at you, or like to see more.
It doesn't feel like it's of a real person, or that if it is, that it's trying to say anything particularly about them, because there's like
about their character.
To it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So one really exciting thing about this series was that there had been a really long-standing debate about whether these were allegorical or imagined or known. But in 2012, there was a public auction in Paris where a page of brown ink sketches by Fragonard appeared, and it showed 18 portrait thumbnail sketches, and 14 out of the 18 could be assigned to surviving paintings within this series. And there was lots of information in it, like some had names next to it, like annotations, and so I mean that's like an art historian's dream for like there's actually a bit of proof. And from that point on, it was generally like, now it's kind of changed the conversation to see this was a series. Like, he intended this to be a series. He intended like, they certainly were of people, but in a way, like you say, the character of them wasn't necessarily the key. Like, yeah,
it's like they're providing a pose.
Yeah, they're providing,
face,
yeah,
but not really providing anything else in a way.
yeah. And then the other thing is like that they all have this loose and energetic style of painting. So they have a room of a lot of the fantasy figures in the Louvre, which was during my Fragonard obsession period a couple of years ago. And they are so amazing when you get in there. I mean, I'm someone who I really love like loose brushwork and like the impressionist kind of thing, where when you step away you see it as an image, like a clear-ish image, and then you go close and it's just loads and loads of brushwork.
That's what I like about, like, as you mentioned, House and Velasquez and those kind of paintings, that like they come together and they fall apart depending on how closely you're stood to them.
And Franz Hals is such a good, like, when I read that about the connection with Franz Hals, I thought, yeah, that's totally
That's what I
sense.
thought when you said it, because his brushwork is so individual to him. It's like this little sort of staccato, like, that you can see, almost like see the wetness of the paint. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. So with these figures, like, you really sense the alla prima technique. You can sense the playfulness as well. Like, I think the fact that these are all people engaged in some kind of leisure activity, like it is reflected in the paintwork, because it feels like he is doing these really quickly and having fun with it in a way. And apparently, I mean, I don't know how true this is, because I can imagine this being quite like a neat myth, but apparently he painted all of them in an hour each, which I'm like, okay, that sounds a bit too neat, but he certainly painted them fast, and like part of it is that he's showing off, I think, that he can paint really fast, and that is obviously the appeal for loads of these painters, and the patrons of painters like Franz Hals or Rubens, is like, oh, look how he's using the paint. There's also so he's by doing that, he's kind of pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in figure painting and portraiture painting at the time, in a very competitive Parisian art world. And I also I mentioned the Impressionists, but apparently he was very admired by the Impressionists. And some people say, another myth, I think it's probably a myth, is that he was somehow related to Bert Morisot. I'm like, okay, I don't know, various things I've kind of read around that, but I can't find anything that convincing.
Well, I think when you read like that line somewhere when you're doing a research, and then you can't find it anywhere else, so you're like, do I bring it up? Do I mention it? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm always like, I don't think it's true, but I asked a friend as well who had done her MA dissertation on Bert Morisot, and she said that just sounds a bit dodgy. So. But still, it's interesting, like how you can see why, like through the style and stuff. And what's interesting is there is, if you can get to London, then there is to see. You don't have to go all the way to the Louvre, but there is a Fragonard fantasy figure in Dulwich Picture Gallery in London.
And a nice Franz Hals.
And a nice Franz Hals, so you can go like and have a look at good brushwork, basically. But the Dulwich Picture Gallery had a really good exhibition about Bert Morisot, and they had a section about her connections to 18th century painting, and they had that fantasy figure there. And seeing it next to Burt Morisot's paintings, you could really see, like, it was great curation. And that was also in 2023 when I was in my this is like a time of my life.
They really fed you it at that time, didn't they?
I know. I was getting so much. So yeah, I guess in terms of the actual painting and what's going on in terms of the subject matter, like this painting is, as we've said, she's not facing us. So most of the paintings in the series are, I think actually all of them, yeah, you can see at least half of their face, like, what is it, 3/4 of their face kind of thing.
Yeah.
Their heads are turned, but you can see quite a lot of their face. With her, you can't. But originally, apparently, like, now they've done x-rays of this painting. Apparently, originally, the woman's face was facing the viewer.
Yeah, because I said to you that it looked like she had a really tiny head.
Yeah, which is so true. And there is something a bit off about her head. She does look a little bit, and you can see, like, if you zoom in, you can kind of see, I guess it's a bit like of a more bluey patch, like, behind her hair.
Yeah.
And there's like almost clouds texture in the paint, and that is apparently the hair of that original woman. Or the headdress, the feather headdress of her coming through. And they have made, in one article, they have made a kind of like hypothetical view of what this would have looked like, which I always find quite fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the fact that she is really focusing on her book is important, I guess, because at this time the genre of paintings representing women reading alone was becoming very popular. So as you said at the start, from throughout the 1700s, books were becoming a lot more available to a wider public. They were less expensive as printing technologies got better. And also the novel was becoming more popular, at least in France and England. And so what's the really fun thing about this genre was that at the time you could have some painters, like in this one, showing a woman reading very intently, like she's clearly, it's a very innocent painting. But then you had other painters at the time engaging in the more erotic side of women reading, because this was considered, reading was considered to be potentially corrupting, of course, for good young ladies. And so there was the classic of the moral panic, but also the titillation of that moral panic provided. So there are some quite raunchy pictures of women reading from around this time. And one of the things that in the lecture they say is that, like, what's really important about this painting is that we can see this young girl's other hand, resting very firmly on the windowsill. So she's not up to anything. She's like, ew.
She's very much like not somewhere one's mind would go.
Exactly. I was like, she's just a woman reading, but no, like this at the time, this would have been very important, and particularly because in Fragonard's paintings of women reading and other painters at the time, often it would be like the artist's wife or a close family member who was posing for this. So obviously, you didn't want it to be interpreted in any way that would be seen as morally dodgy.
No. God, I think women reading, and I think Vermeer. I don't think raunchy.
Yeah, it's true, and I guess it would have been such a different kind of audience and moment when Mia was painting in terms of who were the women that could read then.
Yeah.
Versus this, which I guess opened it up to more like a wider audience. But there are definitely erotic scenes that Fragonard painted, and I actually do recommend you check them out because they're really funny. They're really funny and just so again like oh, okay, this is just so over the top and mad. Um, but none of them include reading, so this one is definitely on the side of moral purity. And what's nice is that like books around this time were celebrated for having the potential to open up people's eyes to like morals and or also I was called in the lecture that Cassandra Albinson talks about like the idea of sensibility and cultivating sensibility as a way of having empathy with others
Mm,
through reading, which is quite nice.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it was just an interesting moment for this in terms of the introspection, the background of eroticism that Rococo has, but that this painting doesn't engage in that. Although you could argue that the paint is very sensory and quite,
Maybe that's the only way it engages in that. I don't know.
yeah, maybe. Maybe when you look at Fragonard's other paintings, you're like, okay, there's some frivolity going on in all of his.
Oh, maybe that's, why the sitter seems like someone who is not really a portrait of a person. It's because that
Mm.
affiliation with the erotic. No one really wants their portrait with that.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I guess also her little finger is just so funny.
Mm.
The way
Sort of like the pinky finger drinking a cup of tea sort of thing.
it's so drinking a cup of tea. Yeah. Um, but I would love to see this painting in real life because I think like when you zoom in on the website as well, like the textures and everything and the colors, as you said at the start, really, I think are
Yeah.
what makes it. So have I convinced you of Fragonard or are you still like, nah?
I like the paint quality of this one, particularly compared to the swing, because the colors and the paint quality of the swing are kind of
No,
don't
I
really
agree.
engage. It's interesting because it feels like when I'm looking at the image you sent me of all of the portraits that they've identified together,
Mm,
the color is very different to some of the other ones, and I don't know if that's because some of the other ones need a clean or were photographed a longer time ago, but it seems
yeah,
very variable. Some of them look, got that sort of very yellowy brown old painting look to them,
yeah,
and this one looks like it was painted, weeks ago, color-wise, just the freshness of it.
you're right.
That's interesting. I wonder what it would be like in real life because I feel like the color and the paint quality are what really interests me in it because, as I said, I find the head a little
Mm.
confusing because if you imagined her turning round, she'd be very wide with quite a tiny head, and that puts me off a little bit.
Yeah,
When you like think about the width of her sort of shoulders and the length of her torso, it's like those there was like a weird beauty trend, wasn't there, recently where people were like shrinking their heads.
Fragonard.
It's giving me that a little bit, but like there's something about it I like. I don't think I love Fragonard like as a whole, like
Okay,
all of it as a whole. But then who does love everything?
I'll accept
That's the
that.
real.
I'll accept that, and I think with the thinking about the ones I saw at the Louvre, like I think rather than the colors, I mean there's a lot of browns definitely and
Yeah,
yellows, but I think the colors did really come through even in the more browny, darker ones. But
yeah.
they all share the really fast brushwork and the
I
play.
think that's the appeal.
Yeah, that's the appeal for me, for sure. Like, I think I have to put on hold the subject matter a lot. So yeah, I'm glad I've at least kind of convinced you of the, well, I thought you would like it anyway because of the Franz, you like Franz Hals, right? And
I do.
Rubens. So
I
I'm
do.
like, I think you can get on board with Fragonard's brushwork at the very least.
Yeah, I'm bored with Fragonard's brushwork.
Yeah,
That was the
nice.
end goal.